Thanks for sharing part of your afternoon with me. The first thing I need to say is I'm doing this, I'm speaking in my personal capacity as the president of IAFIE, not as a representative of the US government or the Office of the Director of National Intelligence or the Lutheran Church in America or the Boy Scouts or anything. This is just me speaking. I've been thinking a lot about moral courage in our profession of intelligence over the years. I've been doing this now for 37 years, and that gives me a certain amount of perspective that I can hopefully share with you. And I'm writing some of this down. Also, there's going to be a chapter in a book that Jim Ramsey and I are putting out, where we're talking about the certification process for professional intelligence education programs. You know, what needs to be in that program and what doesn't. Some of these thoughts are going to be in that chapter. And I also have an article coming out in JPICT, the Journal of Policing, Intelligence, and Counterterrorism, on the topic of how to teach objectivity in an academic setting, particularly as it relates to intelligence analysis. This is something that can be done in government training institutions, but I don't think it's done. And it is best done, I believe, in the classroom. And we're doing a virtual classroom here as part of a larger program of education that puts intelligence in the context of how we operate, at least for all of us, in a democratic polity, how we work that out, and how we manage to deal with intelligence questions in the context of Western society and moral philosophy. It's also something I think that fits better in the classroom rather than in training, because training tends to be more about, this is what you do in intelligence analysis. You're pushing buttons, buttonology, as it were. Intelligence education is more about why we do things, how things are placed in a larger context. You'll be able to see that as I go through my talk here, because some of the references you'll catch are not going to be the typical kinds of references that you'll get in a government training institution. And if we have any philosophers among us, some of this is going to sound a little bit more familiar and a little bit more comfortable. So as intelligence professionals, and I do believe we are a profession, some people doubt that. Some people say we're not, we're just a guild, or we're something just shy of a profession, but I do believe that we're professionals. We, through our education and training and our whole life experience, are really set apart from what I'll call mere mortals, because what we're called upon to do is not easy, and because we, unlike most mere mortals, are given the tools in order to do that difficult job. I think we're at our best as professionals when we exercise the expertise and the moral training that we've been given through acts of courage. And I'll talk about what I mean by that. You know, that courage has a common meaning, but I'm going to explain exactly what I mean by courage. I'll give you one citation. Rollo May, he wrote a book in 1975 called The Courage to Create. The Courage to Create. Rollo May, R-O-L-L-O-M-A-Y. He's looking at human endeavor, human academic endeavor, as something that faces challenges and works through those challenges to become something better, gaining strength through adversity. That's when we work our best, when we overcome those constraints and we don't see them as just something bad to be avoided. To the contrary, we see them as something that's essential to the creative process. We work our best when we're under time pressure, or we're under organizational pressure, or when we have to face opposition of an intellectual nature. We have to convince one another, or we have to convince our bosses of some kind of a position. And that creative tension is vital to the process that we have to operate through as intelligence professionals. If this were easy, anybody could do it. Anybody off the street could come in and do our jobs. And I don't think that's the case, that someone on the street could come in and do our jobs today. Given some education and training, they could. but it's not easy for them to do it. The first essay in Rollo May's book talks about Paul Tillich's other book called The Courage to Be. And the stress here is on courage as a dialectical approach. Courage, as we operate as intelligence professionals, doesn't mean that we operate in the absence of fear or in the absence of stress, but it means that we operate in the face of fear, when we're afraid of the consequences of our actions, when there's stress in the consequences of our actions, and we work through it to be able to overcome the fearful situation or the threatening situation by virtue of our training. Just a short quote here. We express our being by creating. Creativity is a necessary sequel of being. So for us as analysts, we have to face that difficult situation. We have to face a stressful situation. That's what makes us come alive and bring our creative powers to the forefront. That means facing situations that require us to act in the face of opposition from our peers, in the face of opposition from our superiors, in the face potentially of opposition from our ultimate customers, this people we're supposed to be speaking to, and increasingly in the face of opposition from the public at large, which 37 years ago, that's not something that I had to worry about. Today, as intelligence professionals, we can face public derision or public criticism when what we write comes out in the light of day. We would like to be left in peace. I mean, I would very much like to be left in peace to go row on the Potomac every morning and to come back in the afternoon and grow my rhododendrons. I'd love to be able to do that, but that's not who I am as a person. After all the training and education I've got, I live through the creativity of facing down opposition and winning through with the truth. So what do I mean? What do I mean when I talk about courage? Yeah. Courage has many forms, and let me just mention physical courage. Most intelligence officers, and I don't know all of you, I don't know all of your background, but most intelligence officers don't receive public recognition of what they do, and they don't face situations where they have to summon physical courage on the battlefield or the equivalent of the battlefield, which these days can be anywhere. It can be in an office building. CIA's Memorial Wall just this weekend had more stars added to it. There are other installations all around the world to honor people who have given the ultimate sacrifice as intelligence officers. And many today are putting themselves in harm's way in places like Ukraine as we speak. But that kind of physical courage on the battlefield is not the only way to demonstrate courage. Analysts, I would suggest, when they're doing their jobs well, face courage, or they face the need for analytic courage every day. It might not be sparked by a single event on the battlefield or the intellectual improvement of that, or it could be sparked by a lifetime lived devoting yourself to good tradecraft and bringing forward the truth, even in the face of opposition. I mean, I know that's been the case for me over my 35 years, and I'm sure it's the case for many of you. And those of you out there that are young analysts, I'll tell you, if you haven't faced it yet, you will. So physical courage is one thing, and I can talk a little bit about that. Moral courage, which is the real focus of what I want to get to today, is something else. So physical courage. When I was a young analyst in DEA, I was specializing at the time in Colombian drug cartels. I provided to the Congressional Research Service some information about an individual by the name of Carlos Castaño. I don't know if you know that name. You can probably Google it if you want. Carlos Castaño with the Enye. I gave information to the Congressional Research Service about his activities. He was a right-wing, murderous, mass murdering, drug-dealing thug, and said so. I didn't expect that to be put out in public. Mistakes were made, and it ended up, long story short, on the front page, in fact, of Semana, which is Newsweek magazine, essentially, in Colombia, citing me by name as accusing Carlos Castaño of being a mass murdering, right-wing, drug-dealing thug. So he sent a message to me. He sent a message to the U.S. ambassador. He sent a message to the attorney general in the United States saying, if Zuloff has evidence of me as a thug, he can bring it and show it to me personally. I'm a fine, upstanding citizen. That's a threat. I went back to Colombia several times after that. I didn't let it cow me. I had work to do, and I did that despite some better advice from my wife and others. And I have the pleasure to let you know, if you don't already know, that he is actually the late Carlos Castaño. We managed to give him his comeuppance, and I'm still here. Another brief example, in my naval career, I was a 50-year-old naval intelligence reservist, volunteered for active duty to go to Afghanistan as the targeting officer for ISAF, International Security Assistance Force. Please don't tell my wife. I can't tell if she's on the call right now. I don't think so. But I went under fire voluntarily in order to carry out targeting responsibilities in Afghanistan, because that's what the job entailed in order to be able to up the quality of targeting intelligence that we were providing to the leaders of ISAF. I worked directly for a 4-star Army officer, commander of ISAF at the time, giving him the targeting packages. And I believe at the end of that tour, he and I were both able to say that, at least in the area of kinetic targeting, by initiative targeting of insurgent leaders, that we were able to carry out just war in Afghanistan along the lines of what Augustine and Aquinas would say: proportionate, appropriate to the level of combat, and minimizing casualties. St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas would be proud. So moral courage. What form does moral courage take? I don't know if any of you watch Jordan Peterson or read Jordan Peterson. I know he's a controversial individual, but there's one element of his writing in one of his first books where he talks about the 12 rules for living. Rule number 8 is, and this is a quote, "Do what is meaningful, not what is expedient." I'll talk about what that means, because that's a good way of getting at moral courage. This is grounded in the thought that the world is constituted on the basis of truth. If you don't accept that there's objective truth, then none of the rest of this follows. So meet me there and follow me for that period. The world is constituted on the basis of truth, and I believe that as a Christian, that there is truth. Then the way we express our faith is through the willingness to say what is true in the face of consequences to ourselves in the short run or in the long run. It's searching for the truth and being willing to say what is true in the face of consequences. Now, when you do that, as some of you may know, if you tell the truth, things happen, and those things are not necessarily always positive. The things may be good for you in the short run, or they may not be good for you in the short run. If you tell the truth when it's not wanted, there could be career consequences, or there can be personal consequences. And ordinary people, mere mortals, people who haven't had our education and training, know this, right? That's why I believe most people, especially these days, are willing to lie. I don't mean just shade the truth. I mean willing to lie. Even little children, at least my little children, know that. There's circumstances when if you tell the truth, you're going to get in trouble. So they don't tell the truth until you get caught, of course, and then things are worse. The trouble is that many ordinary people, the people who don't have our kind of training and education, remember that, and they stick with that even when they get older. They learn how, as adults, to be expedient with the truth. That's what Jordan Peterson would say. That is not a good long-term strategy. It may get you out of a difficult situation or avoid a difficult conversation or maybe smooth your career a little bit, but that is not good for the intelligence profession, and that is not good for the country. Certainly not in the long run. What's incumbent on us is to have faith that what happens from the result of telling the truth is best in the long run. even if there's difficult consequences in the short run. And we have to be fortified to be able to do that based on, as I said before, our faith in the fact, what I believe to be the fact, at least I believe, that the world is built on the basis of truth. So good and bad consequences. What do we mean by that? There can be career consequences. You know, you won't get that cushy job. You won't get that corner office because you're not seen as a team player. Jordan Peterson talks about his experiences in going onto college campuses and speaking. He has an interesting figure of speech here. He talks about zombies. He talks about being in the recording studio doing his Zoom recordings or webinars, whatever the case may be. And he says the zombies come and they start pounding on the glass. They start pounding on the door. The crowds who don't want to listen to what he has to say come, and they want to come in and they want to get him. They want to use violence in order to shut down whatever the truth is that he's saying. Now, whether you buy Jordan Peterson's positions or not, that concern about the zombies using violence to come after you is still there. So that calls for courage to be able to say what needs to be said, say what you came to say, even if the zombies are pounding on the door. The alternative is worse, I think. If you don't speak when you know that what you have to say is founded in truth because you're afraid of the zombies, then you're giving in. Okay, we don't have to be quite so colorful and talk about zombies. But if you're afraid to speak, then you're giving into a workplace bully, or you're giving into a false prophet of some ideology or other, or you're giving into some kind of political demons, or you're giving into some kind of partisan pressure. And you don't get your message across, and you don't perform your responsibilities as an intelligence professional. That's what the need for moral courage is all about. If I could speak to my young self as a young ensign, what would I say? I would tell myself something that I'm pretty sure I didn't believe at the time, is that there's going to be periods in time where you're going to face a little slice of hell. And you just have to make sure that you show your true self, you show your true tradecraft as an intelligence professional when that happens. And you have to be aware that sometimes people live on the basis of what you say, and sometimes people die on the basis of what you say. That's what makes it so important for us as intelligence professionals. That's why we have to be willing to tell the truth. That's why we have to show moral courage in the face of opposition. People live or die based on what we say. When I was in Afghanistan, as I indicated, I briefed a 4-star officer. What I would do is put together a targeting package with someone's face, a voice exemplar, recent information, location information, and then the 4-star officer would give the authority to use lethal targeting against that individual. I did that for weeks and weeks and weeks with ComISAF, and he got comfortable with me. Well, at first he wasn't comfortable with me at all because he looked at me. I was wearing a naval uniform. He didn't know what to think of me. I know I wasn't an Army officer. I was sitting there in the middle of Afghanistan wearing desert camo chocolate chip uniforms with Navy insignia. He didn't quite know what to make of me, but I showed him the fundamental tradecraft and the firm foundation over the time I was there. Then out of the blue one day, he decided he was going to test me. So I briefed him on an individual who shall be nameless. And he said, I'd never expected this. He said, okay, Commander, what would you do? Now, the schoolroom answer to that would be, oh, well, we're an intelligence officer. Sherman Kent would not want us to give, recommendations to you. You're the decision maker. It's up for you and not for me. If I had said that, I would have lost his confidence in me, and he would begin to doubt everything else I said because I was not showing confidence in my tradecraft. So I had two choices. I could equivocate, or and he would never trust me again. Or I could make a call, which I did. I hesitated for about a nanosecond, but I knew that this was all based on good tradecraft. It was solid, bulletproof tradecraft. And I made the call. And I tell you, I still see that person's face in my dreams. Used to be every night, not now. It's been a while. I don't see him every night, but sometimes. But I'm comfortable with it because I was right on the basis of the tradecraft. Now, courage and the truth. We talk sometimes about analytic courage in the context of our mission. People talk about telling truth to power, right? Tell decision makers what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. That's a slogan. That's a bumper sticker, and we need to talk about it more than just that. Telling truth to power. What we need to make sure is that we're delivering objective assessments to the decision makers about the world out there, and we're giving these assessments to some of the most important people in the world. Now, I have to say here, I was never a PDB briefer, a President's Daily Brief. I never did that. So my hat's off to them for the ability to face the most powerful person on earth across the Resolute desk every morning. I never did that. I have briefed 4-star officers, so I've done some of that. This is in the finest tradition of intelligence professionals in the English-speaking world, and back at least as far as Sir Francis Walsingham. That's another reference you'll find in the classroom, but you won't find that in a training class inside the government. Walsingham had an unenviable job. He had to prove to Elizabeth I, his mistress, that Elizabeth's cousin, Mary, was in fact conducting a treasonous plot and convince Elizabeth of the necessity to execute her cousin. Elizabeth did not want to hear that. Walsingham knew that. So his responsibility was being able to come forward to Elizabeth and convince her of the truth. That's the English-speaking world's tradition that I'm talking about. And Sabrina, I see you there. I know you're saying you're thinking, although you're not saying it, the Venetian Secret Service is older than that. I mean, it's an older tradition, and yes, it is. So maybe someday you can talk about the traditions of the Venetian Secret Service in carrying out intelligence responsibilities. I talk about this because intelligence work is not just an academic exercise. It's not just an exchange of papers. When we teach students in the classroom, it's an academic exercise by definition, but we're practicing to be able to do something else. We're practicing interpersonal combat. That's what we'll have to face, because when we're dealing with a decision maker, we're not only dealing with the tradecraft, but we're dealing with the personal relationship between us and the decision maker. And we can find ourselves at the pointy end of the analytic spear, telling officials face to face sometimes that their beloved policy is not going to achieve their goals, no matter how much they want it to be so. We can get criticized for doing that by our peers, by our supervisors, by the customer, sometimes harshly, sometimes unfairly, and we can pay the price for that. I remember, I don't know if there are any Godfather fans out there. Anyone like the Godfather movies? So one of my favorite philosophers is Hyman Roth. I don't know if you remember, in one of the movies, Hyman Roth is talking to the Godfather, Michael Corleone, talking about a retribution that went on between the two factions in the family. And Hyman Roth said, "It's just business. I didn't take it personally." And here's the words I want you to remember. "This is the life we have chosen. This is the life we have chosen. If we're uncomfortable with the possibility of having to sit across the desk from the decision maker and say words that are uncomfortable, or say words that our coworkers aren't going to be comfortable with, or that our managers aren't going to be comfortable with, truthfully, we need to be thinking of another line of work." You might go through your entire career without having to face that, but probably not. Probably at least once in your career, you're going to face that situation. Here's my situation. And again, I say here, I'm saying this, I'm not the ombudsman, and I'm not saying this officially. I'm talking about my personal experience as having been the ombudsman. I did a major report as the analytic ombudsman on interference in US elections in 2020. If you want to see it, you can Google it. My last name is fairly uncommon, and the word ombudsman, and it will come up. And it was about Russian and/or Chinese interference in the elections. It was not popular because it exposed the fact that there was politicization of intelligence from the top and from the bottom. The moral courage was I had to sit across the desk from the DNI and tell him that he was in violation of analytic tradecraft standards. I had to spend 4 hours on Capitol Hill briefing the Senate about how the IC had engaged in politicization from above and below. I've had to face, at the time and still today, colleagues who took issue with the content of that report. But I'll tell you, the content of that report was based on what I talked about before, bulletproof tradecraft. The easy way, my wife says, and she's right? The easy way would have been when that responsibility was given to me to say, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to put myself at risk. I don't want to put my career at risk. I've got a bright future in ODNI. I don't want to have this around my neck. Let somebody else do it. That would have been the easy way to do it. And that's what an ordinary mortal would have done. But that's not what you do when you're a trained intelligence officer. This was my duty. I had to show, and I knew this at the time, I had to show the moral courage to take up the inquiry, even against what Hyman Roth would have told me. Hyman Roth would have said, no, I'm in line with what Roth would have said. Hyman Roth would have said, this is what you chose, so do the job. When we face criticism from our colleagues or from our superiors or Jordan Peterson's zombies, if that's the case, this again comes back to our lodestar as intelligence professionals, the source of our analytic courage, our analytic integrity based on bulletproof tradecraft. We have to be right. We have to make sure we're right. We can't fudge the methodology. We have to be correct. Doing so is vital as intelligence professionals, but it's even more vital in times of controversy, which these days seem to come about a lot more often than not, because so much of what we do is ventilated in public now. We have to get it right, and then we have to be willing to stand on that rectitude. And, I'm reminded of Martin Luther's words here when he was accused by the Inquisition. He said, "Hier stehe ich kann nicht anders." This is my position. I stand here. I can't do anything else, because he knew he was right, and he knew he had to do it, and he was willing to face the consequences. Now, it worked out okay for Luther, and 500 years later, it worked out okay. So how do we make sure that we're standing on the proper tradecraft? I'm not going to do a lecture on tradecraft. Keith does that in his courses. If you want, you can come to Georgetown University, either in class, in this classroom, or online, and I'll do the same with you. I'll talk about how to do the psychology of analysis and using structured analytic techniques. But it comes down, I think, to 3 Ps. This isn't in doctrine anywhere. This is me. The first P is about packaging. That's choosing our words carefully when we write so that our judgments are at least listened to. It's not the same thing as changing the bottom line or politicizing intelligence, but it's writing our product in such a way that it's understandable by people who might have a different point of view. The second P is presenting. You have to present the information before a decision is made. Even if you're uncomfortable with it, even if you know it's not going to be well received, even if there's still doubt remaining, you have to do that. You have to present it. If it comes after the fact, after you've gotten all the information together, it's probably history. It's probably too late. We have a responsibility to warn and present our information as best as we can and as honestly as we can to our decision makers. And then perseverance. Sticking through the long run, and sometimes it's years. When I was in DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, and again, I don't know exactly who all is online, and I apologize if I'm offending anyone, but DEA wanted to be a small police organization focused on drug traffickers. Fine. But because of what we were doing in the 90s, there was a ton of information that was available in DEA about the ties between drug trafficking and international terror, just like this. We had information that needed to be shared, Before September 11th, 2001, there really wasn't a procedure in place. There wasn't an organization to be able to share that information. DEA was happy with that. They were interested in putting drug dealers away. We needed to create an institution that could share that information with the rest of the intelligence community. And that was going to cost people, that was going to cost time, that was going to cost dollars, and it was going to take away from DEA's primary mission. Most of the organization did not want to do it. So I started a process. It took 5 years. We started on September 12th, the day after the attacks. It started with a phone call between me and Porter Goss, the chairman of IAFIE. And it ended 5 years later by getting DEA into the intelligence community, getting a portion of DEA into the intelligence community. That was the right thing to do. And showing the perseverance of getting it done, in the face of a lot of criticism, was the right thing to do it. In all of this, packaging, presentation, and perseverance, we have to let our tradecraft be the guide. We have to make sure that we have the best information available. It's not going to be all the information. Remember, we're intelligence officers. We rarely have all the information, and the strongest possible tradecraft, honestly presented. And we have to be devoid of our personal opinions in our analysis. We can have personal opinions. We can be members of political parties. I belong to a political party. I'm not going to say which one, but I do. I have political opinions. I'm not going to tell you what they are. Not in this context, someplace else, I'll tell you if you want to know, but it doesn't belong in the intelligence product. Again, this is what the Ombudsman report that I did said, that people let their personal positions get into intelligence analysis. And what was happening in many cases was taking these positions and holding on to them for dear life, even in the face of changed circumstances. Again, that's something else that mere mortals can do, people who are not intelligence analysts. We can't afford to do that. We can't afford to close our minds. We have to be able to have an open mind. We have to have the courage, and this is probably the strongest form of moral courage. A moral courage in being able to tell the truth to decision makers is one thing, but moral courage to tell ourselves that we were wrong and to change our point of view and to admit it in public. That's really hard to do. I've only done that a few times. It's okay as an intelligence professional to be wrong if you discover you're wrong and then you take steps to correct it in the face of new information or if new situations come to light. And that requires not only courage, that requires humility on the part of the individual. But we're okay if we do that, because as I said before, this needs to be based on our faith that the world is constituted on the basis of truth. And when that happens, it's best in the long run. It might be very uncomfortable in the short run. No one likes to admit that they're wrong, but that's for the best in the long run. There's a dichotomy here. I'm almost at the close. I want to mention to you here that Rollo May, remember him? Rollo May talks about a tension between conviction and doubt. That tension can give rise to the highest form of courage. So think about this dialectic. Someone who's fully convinced of all his or her beliefs is perfectly rigid and adverse to anything new, won't listen to new ideas. If that person proves to be wrong, that person's not going to change. That's one horn of the dialectic. The other horn of the dialect is someone who Rollo May talks about as being pan-dubious. P-A-N-D-U-B-I-O-U-S, pan-dubious. That means skeptical of everything. You don't believe anything. If you do that, at that extreme, you become paralyzed because you can't make a choice. You can't come down anywhere. The creative analyst, one who shows the courage to face through that, balances both of those horns. Balances conviction up to the point where the information no longer supports it, and doubt about the rectitude of what's going forward, and has the courage to make a choice of when to speak up. So in the end, why does this matter? Who cares? Who cares if we analysts, we're trained to think critically and to speak objectively? Great, but why is that important? Why do we get the tools given to us that mere mortals don't have? We're given these tools, we're given this responsibility to make sure that we have something insightful to say when we speak to decision makers. One of my students the other day is an aide to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and can bear this. He's not on the call, I don't think, but he could bear this out, that the chairman's day, for those of you who are not Americans, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is the #1 professional military officer in the United States. His day is divided up into 5-minute increments with one exception. Does anybody know what that one exception is? The time that he spends with the J2. He gets up to an hour every day, sometimes less, sometimes more. Why? Because the chairman knows what he's going to get from the intelligence is unbiased, unvarnished, objective information that he needs for the entire rest of the day. And that comes from expertise that we intelligence officers have that's based on that mythical 10,000 hours, whatever that translates to in intelligence. 10,000 hours of curiosity, 10,000 hours of not automatically accepting the analytic line from the organization, even if that's what the senior analyst says. 10,000 hours of asking questions, 10,000 hours of challenging the senior analyst where that has to happen. And this is the hardest part. 10,000 hours of challenging your own assumptions, asking yourself, am I really being objective about this? Or am I a victim of my own biases? And the very last thing I would say to you is all of this is not to say that we as intelligence analysts have a monopoly on the truth, because we don't. There are some people who sort of use that as a touchstone, but we don't have a monopoly on the truth. We can seek it. The words that are on the CIA lobby, perfect for this conversation, because on one side of the CIA lobby are the stars that are engraved in the wall for people who have given their lives in the intelligence service, and we just added new stars this weekend. And on the other side of the lobby, engraved are the words from John chapter 8, verse 32. You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. That's 45 minutes, Keith, and I'll stop right there.
Thank you, Barry. And I'm glad to see you mention St. Augustine, since my office is in St. Augustine Hall. So good shout out to
I thought you'd like that.
So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to open up the floor to any questions for Barry that anybody might have. Just I guess you can just unmute and ask your question. Anybody? It looks like somebody's putting one in the chat. What is the difference between objectivity and neutrality? Is a question.
I think it's a subtle difference. I mean, neutrality implies that there are two sides and that you're trying to strike a balance between the two sides. I don't know that objectivity assumes that there are two sides. There could be multiple sides. And the other thing I would say is, in attempts to be neutral, you're not going to adopt this position and you're not going to adopt that position. If you're being objective, you're looking at the information that's available, and you may well make a choice. You may decide these people are right, these people are wrong. That's the way I think about it. I don't know who the question came from.
John Frank.
Did I help?
Yep. John, you want to jump on and see if that helped? I know he's there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was something I read about with respect to the Congressional Research Service. There were some complaints from former employees that they were being forced to use neutral terminology to avoid offending any ideological readers. So I was kind of wrestling with this concept of, you know, is it the same thing? Is it different? And I think you explained it well, Barry.
Yeah. The Congressional Research Service is famous for saying on one hand and then on the other, and that's what they're required to do. That's their job. And they're some of them are former intelligence analysts, but they're not required to come down on a position. There's danger there for intelligence analysts, because we may say there's this position and there's this position, and we'll say, you know, the evidence supports this, But that still doesn't give us permission to be advocates for a particular policy. All we're supposed to do is say, well, this is our assessment that the future is going in this direction. And we have to guard against being able to pick a policy outcome and say, and therefore, Mr. President, or therefore, General, we think you should do this. We can't, that last part, making recommendations, is not ours to do. We really need to guard against that.
Excellent. Any other questions for Barry while we have him?
This is Bob Smith. Could I shoot something in here?
Yep.
How Bob?
Barry, this is a hot item, but I guess it's obvious. In terms of intelligence education with new students and coming in, the 51 signatories of the letter would tell it, its history, it happened, why they did it. Was that courage or was that noble corruption?
Courage on the part of the officers who signed that letter?
Yeah, that's correct.
Well, this is very interesting because Mike Morrell, who organized that letter, has since said that he did so because he wanted the Democrat to win in the presidential election. He has admitted having done that for political reasons. Now it's safe for him to do so now because he's in private life, and the election is a long time ago. And others have been criticized for having signed on to that letter and very, very carefully crafting it, by the way. I don't know if all of you are familiar with the way it's worded, but they don't quite say that it was Russian disinformation. They say it carries the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. Very, very careful language. So they can't really be accused of falsehood. The problem there is as follows. If Morrell is correct that that was done for the purpose of influencing the election, therefore it's political, right? I don't know about all the about the other signatories. What they're doing is they are not just doing it as John citizen or Mary citizen of the United States. They're using and they all signed with their former titles. Mike Morrell, former deputy director of CIA, blah, blah, blah. So that gives the implication to the American people that the signatories of that letter knew something in addition to what was in the letter. They're using intelligence for, well, they're giving the impression that they're using intelligence for a political outcome. Right? With me so far? They're not in the government. So therefore, they don't carry these cards around their necks, right? And those of you who've seen me, I've given these cards out. I don't know if you can read. These are the tradecraft requirements. It says objective and devoid of political considerations, right? And John Pyrick, when Canada gets their own analytic ombudsman, they'll have a version of that as well. These formers, like Mike Morrell and others who wrote that letter, aren't bound by this anymore because they're not in the intelligence community. If someone in the intelligence community had done that, written a letter intending to use intelligence to, writing a letter giving the appearance of using intelligence in order to influence a political process, they would have been in violation of the law, violation of IRTPA. So is that letter that was written a criminal act? No, it's not a criminal act, but it is a morally bankrupt act. It's reprehensible. And the fact that most of those people have gotten away with it and gone on to lucrative careers doing whatever else they're doing sends a terrible lesson to students in the classroom and to young intelligence analysts, that somehow that's not only an acceptable way to behave, but that can be seen as a positive way to behave. How's that?
You nailed it, because, you know, these are new analysts come along, and then history is going to speak for itself, and they're going to say people like Mike Hayden and others that we saw as thought leaders are now, you know, left their mark in terms of, you know, what they thought.
Yeah. By the way, the ombudsman report that I wrote, it exists in one paper, wet ink version that was hand carried to the Senate, and I did it that way. I put my name on it because I wanted my name to be on the right side of that argument when it came out, you know, in historical time. When somebody digs up that report and sees my name, that I was on the ethically and morally correct side of that issue, not on the side of the people that wrote the letter.
Any other questions? The floor is open. Giving people time to unmute.
Hi there, Barry. It's Jane Van Keenan speaking. I first met you when I worked at the Australian Embassy, representing the Australian intelligence community. I've since retired from DIC, and I'm now in private industry working for an open source intelligence capability provider. And so my question relates to OSINT, or the open source intelligence context. I've observed that there are a range of different folks, people like myself who play in this context, who are very familiar with standards of tradecraft, and others who do not. And so I'm wondering, you know, in the context of OSINT and whether or not you consider it an intelligence discipline, it may depend on which country you're coming from. But how do we promote moral courage in the context of OSINT?
So open source in today's intelligence world is rapidly becoming, in my view, the source of first resort. Think about the intelligence problems that we have these days. When I was a young analyst, we're looking at a missile system deep inside the Soviet Union somewhere. How do we learn about that? You know, signals intelligence from the crew or an image of it. You know, by definition, that has to be secret intelligence. You know, what we would call exquisite collection today. That still exists, but those problems are getting fewer and fewer and fewer proportionately. You know, more and more of the problems that we're facing are more like, you know, some country in West Africa. We need to know the ethno-linguistic and religious breakdown, right? A SIGINT satellite is not going to help you with that. An imagery satellite is probably not going to help you with that. You could maybe develop a human source that would take years to figure that out. But open source, being able to go to something that some professor at Bemidji State University has written a dissertation on, married to someone from that country, goes there, right? Or the ability to find information in a pre-existing information in a publication. That's the kind of information that we need more and more and more. Here's the challenge, though. I think this is more getting what you're getting at. Acquiring that kind of information is relatively easy. Anybody can get anything, anytime, anywhere now, just about. But how do you know the bias of the sources that you're looking at? You know, the professor from Bemidji State University, maybe he's a communist, maybe he's a fascist. How do we know? Maybe his sources of information inside the country are only with one tribe. How do we know? So the open source tradecraft has to do some of the same things that we do for other sources of intelligence. We have to do the validation. We have to make sure that the credibility is assessed. And I think there's another task that's layered on top of this that SIGINT and imagery intelligence doesn't have, and that is we have to somehow calculate the political content of what's being written and assess, is this, and I don't exactly know how to do this in every instance, and we have to assess the potential disinformation that's going on. Who pays for this magazine? You know, where's the money coming from? You know, and that's an additional task that we have. And I don't know that we teach that very much in universities, but pretty much by definition, everything that we teach is unclassified. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we're teaching our students how to do open source intelligence. That's another methodological approach.
Yeah, thank you.
John, is your hand up?
Yeah, Barry, I wanted to ask you about something further to Jane's question there. You didn't mention it, but in terms of encouraging moral courage, I thought the U.S. does a great job with the State Department's award for constructive dissent. So I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit, because I think that's a really interesting idea and something we don't have.
Yeah, so far as I know, state is the only organization that does that. That actually has a formal recognition program for people that raise points of view that later turn out to be helpful. What I try to talk about is the larger concept here is one of a healthy challenge culture. I don't know if that phrase resonates with anyone. The idea that not only is it safe for a junior analyst or anyone to raise a minority point of view, but it's encouraged, it's actively encouraged. And that has to be modeled by the top leader. That has to be fostered by the way you structure discussions. Simple things sometimes. When you gather around the table to scope out a project, don't let the senior analyst speak first, right? When John speaks first, no one's going to want to take a different opinion. Make sure you hear from everybody in the organization, and down to there are structured analytic techniques that are very good at being able to bring this out. Divergent, convergent, for example. Let everybody go off, come up with your list of topics by yourself without opposition. You come back, and then everyone has to discuss those topics and deal with them all on an individual basis without having personal attacks. Trouble is, those things take time, and not everybody has the time to do that, and not all leadership are enlightened enough to be able to want to move forward like that. I'd like to see an award more broadly in the intelligence community to take up on State Department's notion of bringing forward dissent.
There was something else I wanted to ask you about, Barry. Have you ever heard of cockpit resource management?
No, I'm sure you'll tell me what it is.
So CRM was something developed by the International Aviation Association, and it has to do with that challenge culture that you just spoke about. And it was prompted by, I think it was Korean Airlines was having a lot of crashes. And it was because in the Korean culture, you can't challenge the captain. If the captain wants to fly the airplane into a mountain, that's the captain's prerogative. And they found out that, they wanted to encourage essentially a more American attitude to, hey, no, that's not the right thing to do. And they tried to get the entire crew, including the flight attendants and the luggage guys involved in noticing things and bringing them up and so forth. So there's a good example of kind of a deliberate, institutional effort to encourage this challenge culture. And I was just curious if you'd come across it as a bit of a model for us, perhaps.
I hadn't seen that. If you have a link or something that you could send me, I think that'd be great. I'd like to look at that. I know. Look, I've been doing this a long time, and I'm not a shy person, but I clearly remember when I was a young officer, an incident where I spoke up. I was an ensign, and the chief, I'll translate that for civilians. Just fresh commissioned officer and a senior enlisted, took me aside and said, "Sir, could I have a word with you?" That's never good, right? When the senior enlisted says that, said, "You can't do that. You disagreed with the skipper in front of everybody." I vividly remember, having that happen. It should have been the other way around. The chief should have told me, Good on you, sir. That took balls. Being able to tell the commanding officer that there was a problem, but it didn't turn out that way. I don't know how to encourage the latter kind of behavior rather than the former.
But I think what you're saying might be very cultural specific. I think what you're exhorting people to do may not work in some places where there's a higher deference to authority.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it didn't go over very well in the Navy. And I guess in a tactical, in a sense, John, in a tactical environment, you don't want to have a debate. Right? When you're under fire, right, and you've got to go do something now, you don't want to have a discussion and say, well, sir, I don't know, there's another way to do this. Maybe let's go around the hill the other way. That doesn't work. But I do think, however, rarely in an intelligence environment is that kind of situation the case. We almost always have at least some room for deliberation and at least some room for considering other ways to do things.
There was another issue I wanted to raise. You didn't mention it in your presentation, but how important do you think diversity in hiring is to getting objectivity? So diversity writ large, right? I mean, you were the Navy guy working for the Army guy, right? So that's a kind of diversity, right? It could be somebody from the corporate sector that's brought into government. It could be somebody from a totally different field. So that's what I'm talking about. I'm just, ethnic diversity is another issue, but just a mix of people. How important do you think that is to getting that objectivity?
I think it's absolutely essential. But I would say first that objectivity is not always is not always what it seems, right? Or excuse me, I mean, diversity is not always what it seems. I'm Native American. That has nothing to do with, absolutely nothing to do with my capability as a naval officer or as an intelligence officer. But it's easy to look through my documentation in my HR documentation, check the box. Yes, it's one of those. Diversity of experience is what we really want to get to. And as you alluded, have you been in business? Do you have a religious background? Do you speak a language? Are you a scientist? An ideal way to structure things would be to have small work groups that have a theologian, a PowerPoint ranger, a mathematician, different points of view. We are not particularly diverse when it comes to that in the intelligence community. Most of us have relatively similar backgrounds, either foreign service or law enforcement or military or something very close. We don't have a lot of business people. We don't have a lot of theologians. We don't have a lot of marketing people. We don't have on and on and on, right? And I think that hinders our ability to see things in different ways. That makes it hard for us also to recognize when things are changing, right? We've got an assessment and we into that and we hold on to it for dear life. And without different viewpoints coming to the table, we're not as likely to be able to recognize when things are changing and therefore our assessments need to change. So my answer is it's absolutely vital if it's diversity of experience.
I could give a bit of an example there. When I was at the Privy Council office, our counterparts at CIA used to come up, meet with our strategic analysts, they would discuss things. And I think they liked the Canadian perspective because they were a little concerned that maybe they had become too captured by the American point of view on a particular issue. So we were similar enough. We spoke the same language, we had the same information, but we came at it slightly differently. And it wasn't, offensive or too challenging, but it was more provocative and sort of stimulating.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff about challenging only goes so far. I mean, you can only push the envelope so far. There's common understandings behind all of us. Again, I don't know everybody here, but I assume we all are from democratic countries, right? We all have a constitution or something like that we have to observe. We all have elected leaders that we have to observe. We all believe in more or less, well, I was going to say we all believe in borders. So let me change that. We all believe more or less in borders. You know, there are some common things that we can't push beyond. But then at the same time, we have differences of opinion on some things, like the relative balance between privacy and security. That does vary a lot in the Anglosphere. You know, where that dividing line is. So that can be a matter of differing perspectives, even though we do have a common sort of, you know, common law background, common basis in democracy, and we speak the same, as you say, more or less the same language.
I hate to monopolize this, Barry, but I'm really curious, especially for this presentation I got to do tomorrow. What do you think are the good qualities of an ombudsman? Like, who would you hire for the job? Would you hire a lawyer? Is it important to
God,
have
no.
a back? What?
No. That would rapidly become something like an inspector general.
Mhm.
No, you need, it needs to be an analyst. Someone who has been trained and educated to be an analyst, someone who has served as an analyst in several different environments, right? At several different levels, because you have to understand what it means to be an analyst, what it means to be a reviewer of analysis, what it means to be a customer of analysis. You have to understand, you know, how does it work in the first place? And it's not, you know, following a procedure or standard of practice. It's very much being able to understand when the pressure is being put on an analyst that creates a perception, right, of pressure. You can't, you have to have been an analyst. So that's one, I think, my view. And then the harder part is, how senior or how junior do you place the person? You need someone who can be accessible, right, to the workforce, so that people can come in either physically or on the phone or whatever the case may be. The person has to be approachable. And then you also have to have that person located organizationally so that that person can literally, in some cases, walk into the boss and say, look, something terrible is about ready to happen. I need to tell you this right now. As I had done, and I'm looking into this. So what you're talking about is a senior analyst who is well known in the organization, to be able to be both approachable and to be able to be credible to walk into the boss. Then the last thing, I'm not quite sure about this, it would help if it's someone who is past retirement age.
Right. They've got no skin in the game at this point. They don't care whose feathers they ruffle.
Yeah. You know, fire me, please. You know, let me go home and grow my rhododendrons. You know, that you can't, a young, you cannot put a young to middle career analyst in a position like that. It's not fair. It's not fair. Does that help?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Thank you. I would imagine it's an aging experience to do that job.
Yes. Look, I mean, I used to be blonde. Look at this. Yeah. I'll tell you, I mean, look, I told you I was under fire in Afghanistan. I was a volunteer firefighter when I was younger. I carried children out of burning buildings, all of that. Nothing compares with having to go through your entire leadership all the way up to the Senate, and having to tell people that this is wrong, we made mistakes, having to name names. Extremely unpleasant. But, you know, to go back to what I said before, this wasn't just bravado on my part, right? A little bit of bravado maybe. But I had the proof. I had the bulletproof tradecraft. I knew this was right. I knew it had to be done. if I didn't do it, someone else would have to do it, and they wouldn't do it as well. So I've got to go forward with it. I'm very, 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 very glad I did it. I think it's probably the most significant thing I've done in 37 years. If I'm remembered for nothing else, I'll be remembered for that. I hope. Either that or the report will be buried on some shelf somewhere.
Any other questions? Please, again, just unmute yourself and go ahead and shout it out as long as Barry's still willing and able to continue.
My time is your time. As long as I still have code.
Yep.
Yes.
Yes. How do you think that the presentation we're going to do to the leadership or to the decision makers, how do you believe that information architecture plays a vital role in persuading or influencing the decision of the decision maker?
I'm not quite sure I follow the question. So is it how do you approach?
How can we present better the information to the leadership? I mean, are there any templates we can follow? Are there any structure for the content? This I think is very important to persuade.
Yeah. So I would refer you to a couple of documents that if you don't already have access to them, then I'm happy to talk about it further. One is by law in the United States, by our basic intelligence law, IRTPA, Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act, 2004. It's legislation that was passed. There are 3 sections in that law that give positive direction to intelligence professionals to be objective, unbiased, and have the intelligence based on good tradecraft. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more. And then the third one is the provision to have an analytic ombudsman that John and I were talking about. That's sections 1017, 1017, 1019, 1019, and 1020, 1020. Those are the provisions that require that. Then there is another document. You can find it. You can find this unclassified. Google it, or if you can't, send me a message and I'll send you your own personal PDF copy. ICD, Intelligence Community Directive 203, which
203.
Yeah, 203, which lays out the requirements and what needs to be in an objective and unbiased analytic report. That was this card that I showed you that's sort of like a shorthand version that says intelligence has to be objective, independent of political considerations. And then the tradecraft requirements are on the other side. Things like you have to explain your underlying sources. You have to explain not only the strengths, but the weaknesses of your analysis. That's probably more important even than to explain the strengths of your analysis. How is it weak? What are the potential downfalls? And how have you considered alternative explanations, if you have in fact done? And the requirements to be clear and logical in the presentation.
It's like we would do a SWOT analysis, strength, opportunities, threats, and so on, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So all intelligence products in the United States, by law, have to follow those standards, have to follow those tradecraft standards. Yep. And we have a course. It's called Analysis 101. That's my former office. I'm working by myself now. I'm the historian for ODNI. It's great, by the way. I don't have anybody to supervise. I don't have a budget. I just do what I want. But my previous job was, among other things, running Analysis 101, which is built around teaching those tradecraft standards for new analysts across the intelligence community. We have offered that in mobile training versions and overseas versions as well. We've been to London a couple of times, and we're in discussions to maybe be able to bring it to Australia. John, we haven't come to Canada yet, but I mean, it's just as easy to get to Toronto as it is to an American city, or not Toronto, I'm sorry, Ottawa. So the standards for training for how to do that do exist. Not absolutely every product in the American intelligence community follows those standards rigidly. Mostly they do. So I would make those suggestions to you. And if you can't find those documents, let me know.
I can Google it. Okay.
You found them?
My main concern now is about the open source information we find on the internet. How can we evaluate and critically judge this information, misinformation, and this information plays an important role in making a decision between the physical world and the virtual world, and our cognition remains at the top to critically evaluate the lower levels, the virtual and the physical level. Depending on the situation, we are going to analyze or provide any suggestions, improvements, or any kind of assessment to the leadership. How do you think technology?
Just like with any other piece of intelligence, you have to evaluate the source. Where did it come from? You know, you can't, by and large, take something that's written in a newspaper and accept that as the objective truth. I don't think there's such a thing as an objective newspaper anymore, or an objective television network, or an objective journal or magazine. You know, the way you judge them is by understanding where that information came from. Where, you know, how are they funded? What's the editorial line? One.
I have some thoughts on this. If you
all the pieces against each other.
There are some tools we can find and leverage this kind of technology. It's like the search engine optimization that some digital marketplaces are doing to promote the information on the internet. So if we do a reverse thinking on how they promote this kind of information and data on the internet, and we see this information, the top results, maybe on Google or on Bing. If we do the reverse thinking and apply these tools to find the authority of the information, for example, Scientific America has a score. If we apply a tool, we can see many important factors on how to judge and see how every website scores according to the algorithms of Google and so on. What do you think that this kind of tools can help the intelligence community, and what's your opinion on these kind of tools?
Yes, they can help. And help is the right word. They can't do the work for us, but you know, used by intelligence, there has to be a human being, right? There has to be an intelligence analyst doing this. You can't rely on technology to produce information. You can't rely on technology to assess the information. At some point or other, there has to be a human in the loop. And what you're if I understand you, what you're talking about, the ability to reverse engineer what comes out, you can play the tape back to figure out where the information comes from. That's exactly what you have to do to assess, if you know, to the extent that you can, and that information is not available, to assess the provenance of where that where that comes from.
I have to find the cause and effect. It's like a similar topic, and okay.
Yeah. You
We
reminded me.
can validate the information on virtual world with the physical world. This kind of these two worlds can be aligned and validated. I believe this is a kind of this kind of technology can help us validate the information and get the multiple perceptions on the on how people view the opinions, express the opinions, the information on the internet, and validate from ourselves as an intelligence community, and make they can help us make actual data-driven decisions. No,
Yes, and again,
this is my point.
is the right word. They can't do the work
Yep.
for us as long as there's
Yep.
a human who does the judging. Let me give you a very specific example. I teach at Georgetown University here, and I'm adding a component to my graduate course on psychology of intelligence. You know how intelligence professionals think. I'm adding a unit on the use of AI, or artificial intelligence. So in working on an exercise, I asked ChatGPT, ChatGPT
Yep.
version 3, give me 2 pages on Barry Zuloff's contributions to intelligence education over the past 3 years. Right? Pretty simple. And so it gave me 2 pages, and like the front part of it was perfectly fine. Biographical information, where I teach, blah, 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 blah. Then it got down to publications in the last 2 years. And it listed 5 articles that I had written over the past 2 years. My name, title, journal, in one case, a co-author. I had written none of them. Then I asked ChatGPT, are those real articles? And ChatGPT, yes, they are real articles. Okay, send me the URL. Sent me the URL for each one of them. I followed the URL, and there was no article there. And then I see ChatGPT lied to me. And I said, I'm Barry Zuloff. I didn't write those articles. And then ChatGPT said, oh, you're right. Those are not real articles. Those are articles written by somebody else, citing you in a footnote. Anybody else in the world, except maybe John Pyrick, would have taken that at face value. Those are 5 articles. Only the human being able to look at that and suspect that something's wrong and be able to push can be able to do that. As long as we have senior analysts who can either look at the results of some algorithm or an AI or the things that you were referring to, and be able to provide a sanity check, then we'll be okay. Here's my fear. How do you get to be a senior analyst? By writing those baseline things in the first place, right? Writing a bunch of them, then getting them corrected by senior analysts, then you eventually get to write them yourself. If we don't do that, if we let machines do that first level production for us, we're not going to learn how to be senior analysts. And at some point, we're not going to be able to recognize the truth when we see it, or falsehood when we see it. And that'll be a very sad day.
That's true, yes.
Not careful.
Another example I did, I went to the IAFIE standards, and I have input the text of some of the standards into such a tool. I was able to improve the text, right, manually, and disregard any kind of words that were, at some point of view, maybe maybe they shouldn't have been there,
Yeah.
So this kind of thinking to improve and manually correct some of the train of thoughts when we write any assessment or evaluation or any kind of analysis in written words or presentation. I think this kind of tools can help us remove the noise from the, the noise from our minds. They can be very helpful for all of us.
I agree. I agree completely with that. It can help. It's a tool. We just can't let no more, no more than we would turn on a lawnmower and let it go in our front yards. At least I wouldn't. It's a tool that we can use to help us with our work. We just can't let it take over the job by itself. At least not yet. Maybe someday that will happen, but not in the foreseeable future. I don't think.
Yep. Another thing I have to mention, and the last thing is that the analytics tools, these kind of tools are very constant. For example, we have the website of the intelligence community. You have a judge based on the tracking the visitors, the behavioral of the visitors, and improve the kind of information architecture on the websites. Now, this is kind of reverse thinking, because people see the websites, people see the information on their computers, but they judge based on their perception, on how they see multiple different websites on the internet. And graphical presentation, visual presentations, and also the words, the content within the websites or within the judgment or the assessment, any kind of work by the intelligence community, I think by using the analytics tools can help us remove the noise, improve our work, and also help the decision makers to take better decisions. What do you think about this? I mentioned the website because it may be a PowerPoint, any kind of tool, for presenting the information. But
Yeah,
it's the same way.
I think anything that can help put data behind human behavior to be able to quantify, what are people actually looking at, rather than just, guessing.
Yeah.
Can help support decisions. Decisions taken in the absence of data are dangerous.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they can lead anyone to believe anything else than the truth,
Yeah.
It can lead to misinformation or disinformation or any kind of other opinions to people. So being straightforward.
If you don't have data, all you're left with is opinion. Maybe the truth, right? Just because it's opinion doesn't mean that it's false. It may be the truth, but how do you know? How do you know? Well, this gets into theology. I mean, there's parts of belief that have no data. By definition, one just must accept as a matter of faith. That's what faith means. That's not the realm that we work in as intelligence analysts. We try to reduce uncertainty a little bit beyond that by gaining the data that is available, and knowing that it's almost never going to be complete. We're not chemists. We're not material scientists. We're not physicists. We rarely have complete information. We have to judge based on incomplete information and lots of uncertainty.
Yes.
Robin, you have your hand up.
Thanks, Barry.
Thank you. Thank you for those questions.
Thank you.
Wondering if you can tell us anything about the topic you spoke on today, as it's reflected in other member countries of IAFIE or just anywhere else outside of the US? I'm sure there's some interesting differences, maybe some learnings.
Boy, that's an excellent question, and I don't know.
I'm happy to go research if I'm going to voluntold myself to do that.
I don't know. Other than the Luther, everything that I cited was all from the Anglosphere. So I don't know what the traditions are in other languages, much less in other countries.
Mm-hmm.
There's a handful of stories that I can point to. I don't have any Israelis on the line, but there was before the 73 war, there was a lieutenant, what was his name? Simon, can't remember the last name, who looked at his responsibility was looking at the canal, right? And what preparations the Egyptians were making on the other side of the canal. And he was able to assess on the basis of, I forget exactly, but it was like presence of construction machinery and hydraulic hoses and whatnot. And his view was, they're coming. They're coming across the canal. They have never done this before. But there's this idea in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, of, it's called the conception. The conception was, the Egyptians will never go to war with us until they have air superiority. And they didn't have air superiority. But the IDF, the Israeli leadership writ large, didn't reckon on the fact that Sadat was willing to gamble, to roll the dice. And I'm going to go to war. I don't have air superiority. They're going to kick my butt, but the Russians are going to come in and help. So Lieutenant Simon, I can't remember his name. Anyway, the lieutenant was excoriated for bringing this forward, and eventually vindicated. So there's at least one other person there, okay, in the Israeli service who is to stand up and take at least short-term consequences. That's just an anecdote. So
Sure.
What's the phrase? One is an anecdote, two is a trend, three is corroboration. So somebody tell me two other.
I have a counter for. Oh, sorry, John. Go ahead. Oh, you're muted. John, you're muted.
Here we are.
There we are. Yeah.
So I think, Barry, that incident led to the adoption of the 10th man rule.
Oh.
I believe so. Yes.
So it became a standard of practice that whatever the consensus view was, someone had to take the contrary position and argue it. So it was sort of a obligatory devil's advocate role, and a lesson they learned from that experience. If I'm remembering all this correctly.
Sounds like the origins of red teaming almost. Barry, can you tell me if this example is perhaps the opposite of the courage and objectivity notion, where the Soviet officer decided that we shouldn't believe the information coming in that there was an attack on the Soviets, and so he decided not to launch. It's a famous story of so-called courage, but it's kind of opposite to your point.
I think you might be talking about Able Archer.
Able Archer, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's interesting. There's a couple of ways to think about it. One is on the basis of his professional training, right? And he knew what the displays were telling him, but he could also think, right?
Yeah.
And if he had been wrong, think about this. If he had been wrong, we would never know his name.
Yeah. So is that an opposite to your point?
No, I think moral cowardice would have been, okay, the machines say this is an attack coming in. I don't believe it, but I'm not going to piss off the general.
Okay, good.
So I don't think that's an opposite. No.
I'll tell you, John Pierrick, last week in one of our regional director meetings has reiterated to me, I wish some of us had better case studies in our own countries that are not the US, some rich case studies from which to study and learn and explore. And and I think when I asked you, are there other countries who have examples of this? I think that'd be a great piece of work for IAFIE to throw some students at, perhaps.
I wonder what the intelligence section said before Vimy Ridge, John.
Well, to add to a
Wait a
little
minute, let
bit,
me get this straight. You want us to go up there?
Yeah.
I was saying to Robin that, we may have to be creative in bringing in case studies from other fields. Like just as we're talking about moral courage, I was thinking about some scientific cases of people standing up. Galileo,
Yeah, there
the
you go.
guy that thought that ulcers were caused by certain bacteria injected himself with the bacteria to prove that his argument was right. The woman who argued against thalidomide and fought the pharmaceutical industry, so there are lots of, I think, interesting examples we could draw from other fields for inspiration, and I think we need to do that because in some cases it's going to be hard to come up with intelligence-related examples.
Yeah, I mean, our stuff is often, classified. So, yeah, I mean, that I'm sure there's more examples
Yeah.
that we can use but we don't teach many of these. I mean, I don't know what you all teach in your classroom. There seems to be a reluctance to teach failure.
Yeah.
And that's what these are going to mostly, well, let me take it back. I was going to say that's what these case studies are going to mostly show is when there was failure, not necessarily, but.
Well, I got to hand it to the U.S. though, Barry. Early on in my career, I got to take a course at Sherman Kent, and they brought two WinPack analysts out to talk about Iraq WMD, and they basically led the.
Oh, you're muted, John. John, you're muted. No? Oh, maybe we lost his signal.
He probably just turned his camera and
right.
and he'll come back.
Yeah.
I can pick up with his thread. What he was saying was, they as a community, we got that call wrong because we were backing the notion that there was WMD in Iraq at the time, and there had been WMD in Iraq. And what we were seeing actually was efforts to clean it up, and sort of willing suspension of disbelief. There were the stainless steel tubes that could have either been artillery tubes or centrifuge tubes. It was kind of either or, and at the time we said, yeah, okay, those are centrifuge tubes. In retrospect, most experts now agree, well, no, of course not. They weren't machined properly. The diameter wasn't correct. Those are artillery tubes, but we didn't say so at the time. You're welcome. Yeah, John, you froze for a second. You were talking about Sherman Kent.
I was just going to give kudos where it was due in that it was one of those rare occasions when people came out and talked about their failures, and it made such an impression on a young analyst, that you were willing to do this, and a scary case in that I could see myself walking down the same path, given the information that they had. So the final thought there is that I thought, geez, if I ever screw up royally, I'm going to end up in front of a class of new analysts, explaining my failures for the next 20 years. That's a really good incentive not to make any failures.
That's good. Well, in Toronto, when new media and social media started, I was part of the burgeoning community. And we quickly learned that every month we had to have what we called a fail whale session, where somebody got up in front of the whole community and just admitted a failure, whatever it was with a startup or whatever it was. But we had to talk through failing to be able to talk about failure.
Yeah, somehow we've gotten the impression, or the general impression is that we have to be right all the time. Even when we know we're wrong, we have to sort of insist that we're right. There's no requirement. I mean, the tradecraft standards do not require us to be correct. That's a badge. We're not required to be correct. Nowhere.
Barry, do you think the Army is better at learning from mistakes than other institutions? Because I think you have a lessons learned center or something like that.
Yeah. The U.S. Army has institutionalized the whole thought about lessons learned. Other services as well, but the U.S. Army in a big way. And I'm not sure why. Maybe they're closer to the edge of the battlefield, and they they live the need to get things right.
Mhm.
I think it's a cultural thing. There is a lessons learned capability in the IC, but it's not as in the intelligence community, but it's not as robust as it is in the U.S. Army.
Can I ask you?
I suspect other armies as well have a pretty ground services as well have a pretty robust lessons learned function.
You mentioned at the beginning, Barry, that you have an article coming out in the Journal of Policing. And I think you said that it was about how to teach objectivity. Can you give us a preview or the top 5 points or anything like that?
I don't know about the top 5 points, but I make the argument that the classroom is where that needs to be discussed, because it's too difficult to be done in a training environment, and the training environment is your how you produce, right? It's all about how you write things, how you produce stuff, and oftentimes it's focused on specific specific agency requirements. But the classroom, where with intelligence studies built into a curriculum that connects with larger issues like freedom and democracy and moral responsibility, and that's the right place for a discussion about objectivity. And the classroom is also I think I say this in the article as well. The classroom is also a better place to discuss failure and learn from failure than a training environment. And it's easier to talk in a classroom about concepts like morals and ethical values and courage. When we do that in a training environment, it tends to be, there are ethical standards in the intelligence community, and I have a poster on my office, and it says basically, ethics are good, right? It's not very helpful. We can have a long discussion over the course of a 15-week semester about ethics and objectivity in intelligence, and what happens in circumstances where you don't come forward with ethics, or what happens when you're dealing in realms where ordinary humans would think it is not right, it is not ethically, morally correct to lie, cheat, steal, suborn, to hurt people, right? But not so much analysts, but other intelligence professionals are called upon to do exactly that professionally, right? To be professional liars, cheaters, thieves, right? And then how do you square that? I teach a 15-week course in intelligence ethics, and that's not enough. Even that's not enough time to go through all of it.
The reason I asked, Barry, was I was wondering if some of the advice you gave in the article pertained to role-playing exercises, because I know you're sort of focusing on the teaching rather than the training, but I think, if I were to do it, I'd want to model something. I'd want to put the students through it so that, when they were squeezed, when they were stressed, when somebody was telling them to do something, it wasn't just theoretical knowledge. They had some practical kind of, response to that.
Yeah, I don't think I said that in the article, but I actually do that in the class, is I create morally ambiguous situations, and we do role playing, and I force students to advocate a position that they would not themselves choose.
Okay.
And I get all kinds of criticism for doing that, but as you well know, that often happens to us. We have to deal with positions that we don't like to follow. The other thing that's in the article is, and I hope no one takes offense to this, but there are quote intelligence studies programs in the United States, and I'm sure elsewhere, that are staffed entirely by academics. And I don't mean, that's not a four-letter word, right? But without practitioners. And I'm both. I'm a qualified academic and I'm a practitioner. The program needs to be led by a mix, people who have the academic background and, methodology or philosophy, whatever the case may be, and also have practical experience. And they should talk to one another. Right? The practitioners or the recently retired practitioners need to tell the theorists, you need to talk about this. Theorists need to talk to the practitioners and say, well, what you're doing, I'm making this up now, what you're doing is actually in violation of 4 centuries of Western philosophy. And if it's done in the classroom, it's another that the students benefit much more from that kind of exchange.
Mm-hmm.
And there are programs that do it that way, by the way.
Mr. Barry, can I speak? Have another question. As members of the IC, when we travel abroad, can we have a kind of security through the ISP, through the internet service provider, or any kind of security on the devices we?
I think Luke froze, but the answer to his question is no. I mean, when I travel, I leave my own device at home, and I don't take a government device either. I have a really junky old phone that I'll take with me that doesn't have anything on it but the telephone capability, and I have a crummy laptop that has no data on it, that doesn't connect to anything, because I'm assuming that anything that I take with me electronically is anywhere is going to be compromised. I don't even like. Right now. I'm in Georgetown, and this is my laptop. I only brought this with me because I had it in my car. I mean, I would not take this on the metro even. So, the short answer, Luke, if I can call you Luke, is no.
Yep.
I mean, we cannot be secure. We have to assume that everything is compromised.
Yep, indeed, yes. That's
Even
right.
even secure systems. I'll say air quotes, secure systems.
Yep.
Get compromised.
That's true.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Barry, do you want to talk about Copenhagen and any of your expectations or hopes, and give us a sense of what to expect?
Oh, yeah. So IAFIE's conference in Copenhagen in September, and Keith, the dates escape me right now. It's like the 19th.
It's the 11th through the 13th.
Yes. Yeah. In Copenhagen, co-hosted, I guess, by the European chapter of IAFIE and the academy there in Copenhagen. This will be our annual gathering for 2022. We are having people come in and talk about current challenges. I think the agenda should be out by now. It's available if you go to our website, iafie.org, iafie.org.
Sabrina put the link in the chat.
Oh, she did. Thank you,
Yep.
Sabrina. Yeah, you should be able to see that. It's a great opportunity to come together. A lot of what we do as intelligence professionals is speaking with each other face to face, and we can best do that in a conference. I'm going to be talking about on a panel with some colleagues, more on this theme about how we teach this stuff in an academic environment. Sabrina, was there anything else that we should add?
She may not
May have jumped off. I don't see
be
her on there
on.
anymore.
Yeah, she's off.
Okay. Robin, did I miss anything? Keith?
I don't believe so. If we're talking about future events, September in Washington, D.C., I'm not sure if there's going to be a virtual option for it, but there's going to be a day-long IAFIE event looking at the responsible AI in artificial intelligence, which came up earlier today.
Yes, that will have a virtual option. It's being, for those of you in the area, it's being hosted physically here in Georgetown University. And it's looking at what are the limits, what can we ask AI to do? What can we not ask AI to do? What are the threats? What are the challenges? And we're going to have, we plan to have people from other professions come in and tell us how they use AI. Diagnosticians, for example, other allied professions. So we can do some applied looks at how AI is used.
Barry, it's going to get really interesting when the corpus of training material for AI is based on classified information. So an in-house AI, that actually uses the material that, nobody else seizes, that'll be a real game changer.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody's done that yet. That's a very good question. I mean, it should.
Well, I think some companies are starting to do that, where they're internalizing, a chat GPT that only uses their in-house information, and then the quality issues, improve substantially because all the information should be reliable, and then you're basically better at mining the information you have and drawing connections between things that might not be obvious.
Yeah, I mean, it's a powerful tool to help us, right? I'm just deeply concerned that Americans having their love affair, Americans especially, their love affair with technology, will just get into this with both feet and just expect that it's going to solve everything for us cheaply, and it will do a lot. It'll do a lot, but I don't believe that there'll actually be a time when we can completely give up our responsibility. There needs to be a human involved in this. Yeah, so that'll be a good discussion.
Definitely, yeah.
We'll also be continuing our webinar series in October. Have some ideas of what it's going to be about, but it's not finalized yet. And one other important date I want to just share with everybody, which is December 9th, 2023, is the IAFIE Educational Foundation Gala Dinner, which is going to be held at the National Guards Association's Hall of States in Washington, D.C. So that's something to mark on your calendar. And that's all and hopefully in November, December, January, we'll be having webinars to continue these great discussions moving forward. So at least that's the goal. So any last minute questions for Barry or myself?
Thanks, Keith, for putting this on. This is great. Thanks, Barry.
Problem. It's excellent. Hopefully it's one of many.
This was fun. Thank you all. Enjoy the remainder of your morning or afternoon or evening or whatever the case may be, wherever you are.
And to those of you in the States, hopefully you'll enjoy your long Memorial Day weekend. I say that to Canadians too, but I think they just had May 2-4, so we can't really. That's a post event.
What's May 2-4?
May 2-4 is a Victoria Day, but
yes, of course.
That's where the Newfie in me comes out, and I just look for an excuse to celebrate 2 weekends in a row.
Well done, Keith.
One thing before we close this session. There is a methodology of Lean Six Sigma. This kind of methodology can can help us improve the AI. For example, a text we have, and we need to improve this. We can apply this methodology to define, measure any noise in the text, define, measure, analyze, improve, and control the text. And this is how I believe that as an analyst can do to improve the text and through the AI tools and promote better reports, assessment, evaluation, any kind of things we need to do to communicate with the leadership. What do you think about this? By closing this webinar.
Now
It's a pleasure for,
you're beyond my
Yeah.
level of expertise, but what you described sounds reasonable. That you can,
Yeah.
if I understand it, you know, applying some statistical approaches to language, you can help determine the well, not the provenance of where it comes from, but you can find markers in the text that can indicate
Yeah.
where it's coming from. By the way, I mean, I don't know if there's any students on the line, but AI, you know, ChatGPT writes much better grammatically than most American undergraduates. Most American undergraduates have telltale language flaws and grammatical mistakes that ChatGPT doesn't make. And it's just so obvious. You know, you read 15 undergraduate essays. I'm ready to poke my eyes out, and then I get a perfectly formatted 5-paragraph topic sentence and everything. That is not an undergraduate. So it stands out so well.
Yeah.
And you know the students haven't, you know, because it's I've seen it, and so you don't always need to apply a statistical test. You can tell just using the Mark 1 M1 brain.
All right. Well, with that, hopefully we'll see you all somewhere in September and have an excellent summer. And I know
just
there's
a
many
second.
you will.
Just a second.
Sure. Sorry, Andy.
I want to, hello everyone. I want to send you a big regard from Bucharest, and I want to send a message to Mr. Zulov. I will be at the end of the August in Washington DC, and I will be very happy to meet you, Barry, if you have some time to to spend with me to drink a cup of tea together. So
Sure. Happy to do that.
okay.
I'm zulaf.iafie@gmail.com, zuluf.afie@gmail.com.
Great. I will write you an email, and I will let you all my coordinates, and we will see in DC in August. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. And it was a very, very interesting discussion. So hello everyone, and see you next time.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.